Live.
Good afternoon and welcome to everyone. Thank you for coming back this week for another agriculture and law policy webinar hosted by Underserved Communities, the Ag Law Institute for Underrepresented and Underserved Communities is dedicated to promoting equity and social justice in the agricultural system by providing accessible legal education and representation to empower farmers and agricultural communities facing systemic challenges. Our mission is to cultivate legal literacy, protect farmers' rights, and ensure the prosperity and security of underrepresented and underserved communities. My name is Ebony Woodruff. I am an agricultural attorney and also currently the director of the Ag Law Institute, which was created through a partnership through Southern University Law Center and the National Agricultural Law Center, which is the nation's leading source for agricultural and food law information. So again, thank you all for joining us today. Today, I am joined by David Street. David is the Director of Community Engagement for Feeding America. He's also my fellow Aspen Institute Food and Society Fellow, and I'm so happy to be able to share a virtual space with him again. So thank you all for joining us for this conversation about nutrition, food security, and food banks. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to David.
Yes, yes, yes. Good afternoon, good morning, Ebony. I want to say thank you so much, one, for that amazing greeting, and two, it is always a pleasure to share space with you, whether it's in person or virtual. Obviously, we've had the opportunity to do both, and I'm still thinking about the magic we created together about a month or two ago when we did the Justice webinar with the Aspen Institute and Share Our Strength. That was very powerful, and so I'm always excited to be in a space with you, and just a true fan of all of your work. I'm going to start sharing my screen, everyone, so bear with me so I can pull up my presentation. Up, look, there it is, and yeah, uh-oh. So again, my name is David Street, Director of Community Engagement here at Feeding America. I've been in this role for about 1 year. Feeding America is the largest charitable nonprofit in the United States of America. And so when you think about not just getting people food in your local neighborhoods or communities, think about disaster relief, think about other things that pop up. And more oftentimes than not, your food bank is probably serving. A little bit about me. I've been in this particular space, the food justice space, for nearly 10 years. Started my journey back in 2016 at Bread for the World, where I served as the Deputy Director of Organizing, as well as the Next Gen strategist, really helping Bread cultivate the next generation of food advocates, food leaders, food philanthropists. As Ebony mentioned, I'm an Aspen Institute Food Fellow, current grantee from United Way, the National Capital Area, which does a lot of work, particularly in regards to mental health. We all know that coming out of the pandemic, community was a big thing. A lot of people are dealing with loneliness, and that definitely impacts your mental health. So this grant kind of helps us lean into that a little bit. And I'm born and raised here in Washington, D.C. So before we kind of kick it off and start talking about this nutrition piece and food banks, I want to give a little bit more background to who Feeding America is. Again, I made reference to us being the largest domestic charitable relief organization in America. What that looks like in real time is that we are comprised of over 200 food banks that are doing phenomenal work. Last month, I was in the great state of North Carolina in the Research Triangle area and was blown away by not just the amount of food that the food bank is moving, but the other community initiatives and activities that were taking place, from summer school, education classes, things for seniors to do. So think about that and think about this happening 200 other locations throughout the United States. Food banks are doing a great work. We serve about 40 million people annually and over 4 billion meals each year. That's a lot, but it still fails in comparison to where we are, particularly when we talk about communities of color, when you talk about things like access, food desert, food apartheid is now a very commonly used word or phrase. We still have a lot of work to do, but Feeding America is certainly trying to make a dent and do all that we can to end hunger here domestically. So some current statistics, and as of today, actually, USDA actually released, or yesterday afternoon released, some statistics about food insecurity here at home in America, and it's frightening. It got worse, um, particularly for communities of color. Being here in Washington, D.C., we actually just had a consultation with some community partners to one, talk about the statistics, which are probably online via USDA's website, but really talk about the impact that these numbers, these statistics, these data points have with regards to women, for example, communities of color. So we focused in on Latino, Native, and Tribal, and Black, and then just talk about food insecurity as a whole. So think about children, for example. We know that hunger is impacting millions of children all throughout our country. In fact, there's not a zip code in this country where food insecurity does not exist. So we know that whether we knew USDA's current numbers or whether we can just take a guess, because many of us know someone or probably have lived experience, we know that these numbers are real. Just about food access, it's about holistic humanity. If you aren't working a job that or working in a job that's giving you a living wage, you're going to have trouble accessing food and housing. When it comes to schooling for our students, our nieces and nephews, our kids, all those different types of things, a lot of them may be dealing with hunger at home, and school is the only place where they're getting the meal. So I'll talk a little bit about policy, but this is kind of just to paint a bit of a picture for what it's like in many of our neighborhoods and communities, and why so many of us are focused in on food access. So many of us are focusing on policy and other innovative things to kind of remedy these issues. So, food nutrition and food banks. Let's start there. We know that food banks are a main staple in a community. So, if you're dealing with hunger, if you go to a church, if you're in a self help group, they may point you in the direction of a food bank. And food banks over the years have had to evolve and are still evolving when it comes to what does a nutritious meal look like? What does that mean? In fact, I was just here right before this webinar talking with one of my colleagues from the Maryland Food Bank. So making sure that cultural foods and experiences aren't necessarily negated as we try to make certain shifts. And so food banks are doing that. 52% of food is that's distributed, excuse me, is fresh produce. So we all know what fresh produce is. And we also know that produce is very important to maintaining a healthy body, which will lead into maintaining a healthy lifestyle. 25% of that is dairy products, and 20% is protein. So think about your meats, your fish, your eggs. And so this really makes up the bulk of the food that food banks are moving on a daily, weekly basis. And these things are very important, particularly as you hear the food is medicine piece. A lot of us have probably been in conferences or sat at meetings where more and more people are talking about food as medicine because of the implications that it has. We know that food can be healing, food can be comforting, and it can also be dangerous if it's overconsumed or if it's you're over consuming, yeah, over consuming too much of the wrong things. So food as medicine is not just about education, but it's also about unlocking various resources that get at the barriers that will stop people from tapping into fresh produces and dairy products and the like. And so food banks are trying to do that. We're also trying to be sensitive with cultural foods. And so we know we have food banks in Latino facing areas or native and tribal areas. And so a lot of the food that we source will speak to the community that we're in. We want to have that cultural competence, not just with talking points, but also what we do with action when it comes to food. So nutrition is something that food banks, always trying to do a little bit better job of trying to make sure that we can get more products, that we can connect better with farmers, Black farmers, to produce to get the right types of food to people who come to our food banks. But most importantly, we also know that nutrition has a policy piece to it. And so when we talk about all the different things, food is medicine, getting your food online, food banks are also starting to dive into that a little bit, because we want to make sure that we can reach as many people as possible. So pivoting a bit, talking about some of our national and local work. Fun fact, over 40% of food that is moved through food banks comes from our faith partners. So shout out to the mosques, synagogues, churches, faith organizations. They are really good community partners that help us reach our neighbors when it comes to overall food distribution. That's happening at the local level. At the national level, we do a lot of policy work and we interface a lot with a lot of national organizations. Some of the organizations that I'm personally excited about are groups like MAN, as Minorities in Natural and Agriculture and Natural Science, really cultivating the next generation of ag leaders to be our thought partners, to be our food justice advocates, et cetera, as we continue to advance and make sure that communities who've oftentimes been marginalized and overlooked get the resources they need by way of food. And then, of course, food banks. Food banks are trusted partners both at the national level and the local level. Again, we know we partner a lot with religious organizations. We know we partner a lot with other local groups, but at the national level too, our local food banks will oftentimes connect us with leaders that will come to Washington, D.C. and advocate on things such as the Farm Bill. We know how important the Farm Bill is. It still hasn't been passed. And so when we think about things like SNAP, we know how important that is for families when it comes to nutrition and when it just comes to putting something into their bodies. So some success stories. Food Bank, again, I was in North Carolina and they implemented a healthy foods initiative, which really increased the availability of fresh produce. So down there in North Carolina, right outside of Raleigh, an area called Clayton, they got a Black farmers market. And the Black farmers market is obviously connected with Black farmers. And so the food bank down there has been working with the Black Farmers Markets Council to get ideas, to figure out new and innovative ways to take their produce and get it to as many people as possible, not just on the Saturday that may happen once or twice a month, but in other unique ways. And so I was really pleased to hear that they were increasing the number of clients. I'm sorry, they were increasing the availability of fresh produce. And as they're tracking these things, they're reporting improvements in dietary habits, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and go back there actually, because I don't want to just stop here in North Carolina, but most of our food banks are doing some amazing work. Their healthy food initiatives might look a little bit different. I know some of them are partnering with groups like Lyft and Uber. Other groups are creating more communal spaces so people are coming to get not just food, but actually community. Again, as you think about our seniors who are oftentimes shut in and looking for that communal approach, that's happening. It's happening through our food bank. So all these things are really successes in our eyes. I'll leave you with this picture before I open it up for questions and thank yous. At Feeding America, we really do try to live into the themes that we hear: sustainability, equity, advocacy, and the like. And so these are just some of the faces that help us do the work. The gentleman in the suit is a Reverend Herbert Brown, who is the president of the Black Church Food Security Network. And they are doing fantastic work all over the country, connecting churches with community. Um, they are not only moving food, but they're creating some unique partnerships that are getting food to some interesting places all throughout various neighborhoods, cities, and regions. So certainly want to commend them. And the Black Church Food Security Network is just one of many national partners that Feed America works with at the national level, and that our food banks actually engage with. And so it's not just the food banks, though they are doing a lot. It's about the community partners. It's about the academics. It's about the policy wonks. It's about the food justice leaders. All of us as a community coming together to punch above our weight class, make sure that we change the dynamics in this country, so that we tear down obstacles that keep people marginalized. So we tear down obstacles that limit access, and make sure that food, along with so many other things that are connected to food, whether it's work, whether it's education, whether it's just mental health, all those things could be a lot better than they were this year and previous years for ourselves and our families and our communities. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now
Well,
and
the slides
just.
weren't advancing, someone pointed out to me, but just to let you all know, I do have a copy of the presentation. And so it will be posted on our webpage, www.sulc.edu/ALI. You go to the events tab, and then there you'll see past webinars. We have all of the webinars posted that we've done thus far. And so a few hours after this webinar ends, it should be posted, the recording and also a copy of the slides. So we apologize for that little hiccup, but technology sometimes gets in the way.
Oh man, I felt like I was in my bag, as they say. I felt like I was moving and grooving. I didn't even see the comments and all. So yeah, I don't know how that happened, but yeah, let's be sure to get these slides out. And I'm always happy to connect with anybody that wants to chit chat about collaborations or just wanting to learn. I'm always ready to listen. So yeah, thanks for flagging that.
No problem. And so since you mentioned it, let's just go ahead and get it out of the way. If someone wants to connect with you, how would they get in contact with you?
Yeah, I would say it was on the last slide, but obviously that's not relevant. My email is D as in David, A as in Anthony Street, DA Street at feedingamerica.org. I'm also very active on LinkedIn at David Street. So those are the two places professionally you can certainly link up with me. We can connect. Um, but yeah, that's probably the best way.
Okay, good. Well, at this time, we are opening it up for questions that you may have. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask a few questions and some points of clarification. So in the beginning, you referenced food deserts and food apartheid. Could you elaborate on those terms and why there was a shift in the narrative from food deserts to food apartheid?
So I'm not quite the historian, Ebony, that you probably are. So I don't know exactly when the shift took place,
Mhm.
but obviously there was a shift in thinking and reasoning that food desert is probably an inadequate term to talk about what's happening in many of our communities, particularly communities of color. And so apartheid is a very different terminology. It's a very different experience. I mean, most people think of apartheid, you naturally think of South Africa and some of the things that happened there, and you look at it now through a food lens. And so that shift, I think, does a couple of things. One, the name alone shocks you. it brings you to say, okay, well, a desert is something that's man-made, a desert is something that's natural. Apartheid isn't. These things were forced upon us more or less, just like highways through communities of color, just like redlining. These things were systemic in nature, and this is why a lot of our communities still wrestle with access. A lot of our communities still wrestle with getting the fresh produce and fresh fruits that they need. This was a systematic doing, and policy and policy is going to have to be a tool, just like it was in perpetuating this problem. Policy is going to be one of those tools that help us eradicate it. But I don't know exactly when the shift took place. I don't know the year or who takes credit for it or anything like that.
Well, I don't know those specifics either, but pretty much like you said, the term food desert, from what I know, a lot of advocates, activists thought that the term, I don't know if they necessarily thought it was offensive, but definitely that, I guess, in the sense that deserts are naturally occurring. And so when you think about food deserts, it's not something that's natural. Oftentimes it's due to policies on a local level, is why don't have access to fresh foods and produce and grocery stores in certain communities, but high rates of, fast food restaurants and liquor stores and things like that. And so there was a shift to food apartheid. But like you, I don't know who's taking credit for exactly when that thing was. That you had pointed out that food banks are now, did you say, accepting orders online? Could you elaborate on that? No?
No, we're not quite Uber Eats just yet.
Okay.
But that is something that we are trying to figure out. I mean, when you think about access and you think about people who are sometimes in communities, Uber Eats or a platform like that gives them access that they may not necessarily have through transportation or other things. And so it behooves food banks to also figure that out. And they're talking with those companies. They're working with local organizations who may already have that infrastructure. We could certainly be doing a better job with it. We could probably be moving a little bit more expeditiously. And I think food banks would say the same thing. But it is an area we want to figure out because we understand that that's a tool to help us get food to people.
Okay. Still no questions from our attendees, but I would like to ask, okay, wait, nope, here's one. So someone wants to know, are you familiar with food swamps?
I've heard the term, and again, it's one of those things. I feel like there's an evolution in terminology. We've gone from food desert to food apartheid, and I think food swamp might be a little newer-ish than apartheid, but I'm not all that familiar. So please, let me know how that's relevant and what it is.
Okay, let's see. So I did a quick Google search, and it's saying food deserts and food swamps are both terms used to describe the availability of food in a community, but they differ in how they affect access to healthy food. So in a food desert, these are areas where there is little to no access to healthy food, and people
Got it.
living in food deserts may have to travel more than a mile to get to a supermarket. However, with food swamps, these areas have a wide range of food options, but many of them
Okay.
are unhealthy. And so food
Right.
swamps are often characterized by an abundance of fast food restaurants and convenience stores, which offer processed foods, alcohol, and tobacco. So that's something new
Okay.
to me too, because I had not heard the term food swamps, but
Yeah, I feel like I have, but I'm not familiar with it to that extent. But now that I am, because that picture, Ebony, I think a lot of people can just close their eyes and easily visualize all that you just read in one shape or form. So yeah.
Yes, you froze up for a second, but when you said close your eyes and visualize, I know I can think about communities that I grew up in. And
Yeah.
I'm so, for you all who don't know, I'm from New Orleans, and so I can think about several areas of the city where there's just no grocery stores, but again, lots of fast food restaurants and corner stores that are selling things that are not necessarily good for our health. So we do have another question. Do you guys explore partnerships with developing urban farming research sites? Are there subsidies? And also, what are the most distressed areas or regions? Are you needing to find solutions that could address local, regional, national supply chain, nutrition access needs? So I know that
Okay.
was a lot. So let's go back to, so do you all explore partnerships with developing urban farming research sites?
So the short answer will be yes. When I say that Feeding America is connected to pretty much 80% of the organizations that are out there, I mean that in a sincere way, not just on paper somewhere, sign on sheet, but we're probably working with them through like our innovation hub. We have a strong innovation team here that explores various partnerships. We also have two departments, one called our Community Accelerator, as well as our Food Equity Fund, where we work with not just research sites, but a number of community-led organizations. We fund them, we support them. They're connected with our local food banks, and they work on various projects that are germane to that region that their food bank covers. So those are some of the tools that I'll point to say that that first part of the question will fit in. Our community accelerator, our equity fund, probably houses those types of partnerships and works with those types of institutions. As far as the most distressed areas or regions, there are a few different ways to look at that. One is just the 10 hungriest states. That's obviously a place where a lot of our food banks are probably punching above their weight class. You think about where these places are, there's probably no secret that I think about a third of them probably in the South. Then you go to the Midwest, and just looking at the numbers from USDA, I know the West Coast had a spike in what food security insecurity looks like. But that's a place that we start, like with the hungriest, the 10 hungriest states. Then because of climate change, you talk about just what food banks are having to do. Food banks who are generally in Louisiana, in Texas, in Florida, because of storms and different things of that nature, they're doing tremendous work now, a lot more work than they've probably been doing because of the severity of storms. And so I know for a fact that they are developing partnerships, looking for innovative ways to connect with government agencies, again, churches, other community groups. They're raising money to give out grants at times to organizations that can kind of help them in those natural disaster areas. And so, yeah, I think there's a whole gambit, but I think like the 10 hungriest states and where you see need, your areas where natural disasters are more likely to occur, or where you see the greatest need, and then there are probably some other outliers too.
Okay, so according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture in 2023, the states with the highest percentages of households experiencing hunger: Arkansas, Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, South Carolina, Oklahoma. Not that I expected you not to, but yes, so the South and the Midwest is where they're located. So we
Yep,
have
yep, yep.
another question. As trust is so relevant when communities of color try to access services, what have you seen when it comes to Latino community accessing food banks or engaging with them?
Well, that's a big issue for the Latino community for sure, because of how politicized immigration and all is. We know that um, Latinos um, are living, some of them, not all of them, have family members, friends, whomever, that that may not feel safe or comfortable producing documentation, going to places where there may be a police presence or dare I say ICE presence, because that could mean for their family unit or them. And so when you think about food banks and all, food banks understand this. They understand the political climate that we're in. They understand the implications that exist. And so you have food banks who are trying to figure that out, particularly, again, in those areas where you have a high Latino population. I would imagine that they are trying their best to figure out the right ways to make sure that those communities get access and all as well. But it is something that cannot be ignored. And again, I think that's one of the issues where, regardless of what political party or stance that you're on, it's just visible in front of your face. That things like immigration have become so politicized that it's very scary for certain communities, and so that trust is absolutely needed if we really want to service individuals and people who don't have access.
Thank you for that. So we're still accepting. If anyone else has questions, we welcome them. But in the meantime, I'll go ahead and ask one. So, Mr. Street, what systemic factors contribute most to food insecurity in underrepresented and underserved populations? What do you think? And how can we work with food banks to address it?
That's a tough one, but if I had to
Mm.
answer it for this conversation, Ebony, my mind goes to policy. I think about so I'm in Washington, D.C. That's where I'm from, that city I live in currently. And Ebony, when I met you last year, we were talking about the Farm Bill. We're a full
Mm.
year later, and we're still talking about the Farm Bill.
Yes.
And I think we're talking about nearly $500 billion of resources and all that in one way, shape, or form isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing because people can't vote on it or whatever the case is. I think it says a lot about the political strength, appetite, and how things just become politicized for people to win elections or do other different types of things. And so, policy more than charity, policy more than what Black farmers can produce, all those things put together would only put a little dent in the resource that policy can bring to this conversation around food. The best example I can give is during the pandemic when families, through the child tax credit and other resources, saw a huge dip in some of the issues that we're talking about today because there was legislation there that they didn't, and resources there that they didn't have before. And so policy is top of the mind right now. And again, maybe it's because I'm in DC, it's election year, and all those different types of things. But as I think about the Farm Bill and how slow it's been, how people have been trying to piecemeal certain parts of it just to get resources out, I'd say that's the thing that people need to pay attention to. And so when it comes to food banks are always looking for people to advocate. Call your congressman, senator. I know it is it worth it, but it is. And so we have to continuously motivate ourselves and sometimes do the laborious stuff to get the results that we want.
Yes. Thank you. Well, okay. Another question. Thank you for asking. Do you help fund pilot grocery stores? Are there policies that grants dollar-backed structures for EBT programs or tax credit subsidies?
So no, Feed America does not directly do those things. I mentioned our uh, food equity fund. So I think starting back in either 2021, 2022, Feed America had this initiative where we wanted to invest not just with our food banks, but with our neighbors at whole. So, you know, when you talk about entrepreneurs, you talk about for-profit, nonprofit who are doing some amazing things in their neighborhoods and communities. Um, that fund helps fund some of those initiatives. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there's a community partner in one way, shape, or form connected to something like that. But it will be through that particular fund. Feeding America doesn't necessarily do grants directly to community led groups that probably come through like our local food banks and all. Should be, because the food banks are oftentimes more trusted than the national office. That's just how it is with anything. Your union chapter is probably more trusted than the national chapter. And so they'll probably be the ones that can have better source and resource the various requests, partnerships, all those different types of things that lead to grant dollars and subsidies that I think are being flagged and mentioned here.
Thank you. So I know we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but again, just directly for clarification for any farmers or producers that may be tuned in, how can they partner with food banks? So if, we have a farmer, they're growing things and they want to partner with a food bank, where could they find information about the steps in the process for that? Or if could you, let us know?
Absolutely. So the first place to go is through probably your local food bank. And most food banks have a community engagement person whose sole job is to try to connect community with food bank, not just for policy and politics, but for produce, for other different types of things that will, in some way, shape, or form, benefit the community. So if you are in an area and you're building a relationship with you want to build a relationship with the food bank, I would just go on their website and figure out who that community person is. And if they aren't handling it directly, because food bank is different, they may have someone that directly specializes in Black farmers, depending on the state and region that they're in. But start there. That would be a great resource for you. Not to mention, that's just from a supply and produce standpoint, but community engagement will oftentimes ask other questions to try to figure out other opportunities and areas for individuals to get plugged in with. For example, a lot of food banks have advisory councils. So maybe you're coming into a food bank and saying, okay, I met with the community person, I was able to connect my farm and others, but there are some other blind spots I think that the food bank has. They may ask you to serve on a council to kind of how to make it better for the people or groups that are coming behind you. So they're eager to connect. A lot of information is found on their particular website. So a quick Google search or just typing in the food bank's name into your browser, and you can figure all that stuff out within a matter of minutes.
All right, thank you. So you mentioned that you've been in this position for a year as the Director of Community Engagement. Just wondering if there are any highlights or successes that you've had that you're particularly proud of or excited about that you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, I would say my learning has been the greatest thing. I feel like when I came into this role, I had experience, certainly from an organizing standpoint, from a food justice standpoint, um, but it was so much focused in on just policy. I feel like Ebony, through our interactions, other people from the ag space, I've been able to kind of go deep with understanding what agriculture is, and not just from an advocacy standpoint, but from an
Mhm.
entrepreneurship standpoint, from an empowerment standpoint, understanding what it means to be Black and be reconnected to land and all those different type of things. Being a part of those movements and those spaces has been very rewarding and refreshing for me personally, particularly someone from the city where there is not a whole bunch of land to
Mhm.
begin with. So when I get to hear stories or I get to see it kind of manifest itself, and then you see the successes behind it, you see farmers, and again, we have Black farmers can certainly use more money, visibility, et cetera, et cetera. But they're doing things that's like, wow. Um, they're paying for their family, their kids to go to college with it. They're feeding their communities. Um, Again, they could be getting a lot more resources and visibilities, but it's just empowering to see. So that's probably been the coolest thing for me personally is being in a space that allows me to kind of go into these different spaces and fields, learn, pick up resources, make new connections, and then try to connect that to policy. But the learning by far has been the greatest reward this year.
Nice. So we have another question from one of our attendees. Does Feeding America require documentation such as IDs or bills with your name on it, etc., at the sites in order for people to receive food?
No, not that I know of. I have my colleague here from Maryland Food Bank. You guys don't ask for IDs and documentation. Yeah, no, no, no. I don't. That's I have not heard of that. I can't imagine why they would do that. And if they do that, don't give it up. That doesn't sound right.
There are there
Go ahead. Hold
there
on.
may be so I know there's been an effort to like track, like the demographics so they can have a better understanding of who they're serving, but that shouldn't sharing that information, that personal
Yeah.
information should not be mandated.
Right.
It should be voluntary.
Right. So
And
yeah, personal information,
yeah,
no, but general things, race,
yeah,
possibly gender, all that stuff, absolutely for tracking purposes and to get a clear sense. But you shouldn't be giving out your social security number at the food bank.
yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Anyone else? Any more of our attendees? Thank you all for the questions. Yes, we have another one. Thank you. I'm glad that you all are engaged. We really welcome your participation and are so excited that you are joining us. So, who are the best impact partners for agricultural land construction materials regarding with Tractor Supply Company and John Deere pulling back DEI initiatives? So with Feeding
How many?
America, yeah.
I,
Any
I'm gonna actually let you probably pick up that one. That sounds like it's very ag related. Um, Do we probably have a board member or someone that's connected to John Deere? I wouldn't be surprised.
mhm.
But 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 yeah, I mean, we're the food bank, so we probably be connecting kind of on the back end, if I understand the question correctly. But you the ag person, how does
Right.
somebody get connected to John Deere? Tell me, how did
So
I get connected to John Deere?
um well, in terms of impact partners, so again, now I'm the Ag Law Institute at a law center, so I'm not really dealing with them. I can say this because I have read some of the articles and what was happening. So I know the one with Tractor Supply Company, it seems like they really were pulling back from some of the information that I've seen about John Deere. It wasn't really them pulling back. Let me not even speak on it because I really don't remember the article in detail, but it seemed like they weren't pulling back, but that they weren't engaging in certain activities like festivals and fairs or something, but yes, just let me not even speak on it because I can't really give a good answer to that. But I can say, and this is not to, promote John Deere or say that they are a great organization, but I can say as an agricultural attorney, some of the things that I know that John Deere has done personally. So prior to my position here at Southern University Law Center, I was a legal fellow at the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund, which is a 57-year-old nonprofit organization of Black farmers and landowners and cooperatives. They organize or they operate primarily in the southern region of the United States, and they focus on land retention, advocacy, and co-op development. And so John Deere has partnered with them in the Thurgood Marshall, I think it's legal fund. And so what they do is they do provide opportunities for law students to do agricultural work. So I know in addition to working at the Federation, they also send students to the Center for Heirs Property, which I believe is located in South Carolina. So I know that's some of the work that John Deere is doing. So again, with that, they pay the students stipends and they pay them really well. And in addition to that, also housing, they get to fly them out to the John Deere headquarters with L. Roker Entertainment. And so they produced a film, Gaining Ground, which I was featured in as an attorney. And it was also while I was working with the Federation. And so that documentary was filmed, I want to say directed also and produced. I'm not really in the entertainment world, but I know Eternal Polk, who is a wonderful, amazing human being. But the documentary is great. It follows families who have heirs property and then advocates working in the space. And I know that John Deere has put money behind that initiative as well. And not to say that corrects any wrongdoing that, farmers who are really out here living the life and experiences that they may have had with the organization, but those are just things that I know from my personal direct experience with the organization. But in terms of impact partners, again, the Ag Law Institute at Southern University has been in existence a little over a year now. And again, because we are legal, we haven't really dealt with any of the organizations directly. Although we would welcome some partnerships and some support and, sponsorships for sure.
And as I'm thinking, listening to you talk, I would probably lift up Manners, the work that they're doing with, entry level ag and all. And I think John Deere might be a sponsor of them.
They are.
But I don't know. But specifically for John Deere, that's out of my wheelhouse. Yeah.
And then Manners, for anyone, it's the Minorities in Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Related Sciences. But it's an organization of Black and then, of course, other quote unquote minority students studying and pursuing agriculture and related sciences for career options, and they are supportive of them. All right, well, it's now 12:50. And so if there aren't any more questions, then I am going to give everyone about 10 minutes of their time back. But again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this conversation. Thank you, David, again, for sharing your knowledge, talking about Feeding America, letting us know what they're doing, and taking time out of your day today to be here with us. Thank you to everyone who has attended. Thank you also for taking time out of your day to be here. Also, thank you all for the engagement, for asking really good questions and engaging with us in the dialogue. We really appreciate the support. Again, this agriculture and law policy webinar series we've been hosting pretty much weekly, Thursdays, 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Central Time. We have a lot of other exciting webinars already in the works. And so you can find that information at www.sulc for Southern University Law Center.edu/ALI for Agricultural Law Institute. Go to the events tab, and then from there you can see the current upcoming webinars that we have scheduled and register for them, as well as under the past webinars tab, you can watch the recordings of the webinars and also go the slide presentation. So again, on behalf of the Agricultural Law Institute for Underrepresented and Underserved Communities at Southern University Law Center and our partner, the National Agricultural Law Center, I thank you all for attending this webinar, and I hope to see you virtually at another one in the future. So thank you again to our attendees. Thank you, David. Thank you, Feeding America. And I'll see you all soon.